So for our next segment, we are talking about corruption. We're talking about the seat of the devil's influence on our society and on our world. We're talking about the corruption that comes from power and nepotism and influence. So, of course, we're talking about someone that holds no official position in the government at all, Mr. Hunter Biden.
Yes. So I'm probably going to have a different take on this than most of what people will see in the media. But before we get to that, let's go ahead and discuss the facts of it.
Totally.
So
Yep.
This week, Hunter Biden, who is Joe Biden's son, had a plea agreement on 2 charges related to the failure to pay taxes. Now, this happened in 2017 and 2018. And basically, Biden was a resident of Washington, and he had a taxable income of more than $1.5 million, which, holy shit. I know that among elites that's standard, but I just want to point out, holy shit.
Especially for a guy who seemingly his only qualification is having the last name Biden.
Yeah, pretty much.
Not to echo like Republican, like conservative talking points, but
it's, it's true. Like, it's true.
Yep.
So he owed more than $100,000 in income tax that he did not pay on time
Each year.
So
yeah.
each year.
In 2017 and 2018. Yeah.
Yeah. That's no bueno. We don't like to see that. He did eventually pay.
Yep,
and
including
he has
penalties. Yeah.
Yes, and he has pled guilty to those charges, and it's looking like he will be receiving 2 years of probation as a result of that. Now, there's another charge that has been brought against him. It's still a little bit in limbo, and that is a gun-related charge.
Yeah.
As a lot of you probably know, or maybe you don't know because you don't really give a shit about Hunter Biden, Hunter Biden had a major drug problem just a few years ago. He was suffering from addiction to crack cocaine, and it was a really rough time in his life. And at one point, he bought a gun, and in filling out paperwork to buy that gun, he lied about his use of drugs on the document, which means that he was illegally in possession of a firearm for like 2 weeks. Like, he didn't have it for very long because apparently his wife threw it away, which honestly, probably a good thing.
Although,
I mean,
don't like throw it away. She threw it in like a dumpster. It's like,
yeah.
Now
Okay,
you
don't
just
do
have
that.
the gun your husband owns like available for people to take.
Yeah. But like, if you're someone that suffers from drug addiction, it is probably better to not have guns in the house.
Yeah, totally.
Which, by the way, I'd just like to point out, I do think it's kind of funny that Republicans are complaining about how the book was not thrown at Biden for a gun-related charge when they're the ones that are trying to like
Make
limit
sure there are
the
no gun-related charges.
limit the very paperwork
Yeah.
that Hunter Biden had to fill out in order to get the gun in the first place.
Yeah.
So like, if they were being intellectually honest, they would say like, this charge right here is bullshit because people shouldn't have to fill out that paperwork to get a gun. They should be able to, go to a vending machine and get a gun.
Yeah.
But of course they're not intellectually honest, so they're not going to say that.
Yeah. So what's interesting here is that, there's 2 potential charges apparently here. One is like lying on a federal form, basically. And the other is actually that it's, against federal law to possess or purchase a firearm when you are a user or addicted to a controlled substance like crack cocaine. Yeah, so there's kind of 2 potential things here. And it appears that he was only charged with the possession of a firearm rather than, lying on a federal form. And from what I gather about reading about this one, like it's like fairly uncommon to be charged with lying on a federal form in these kinds of cases, unless that just gets tacked on to other
Yeah.
kinds of charges.
Yeah.
And usually, even the possession, when it comes to addicts and addiction, even the possession of a firearm apparently is pretty rare to be charged anyway, unless unless it's like part of, again, like other crimes, or unless there was violence involved. So typically, it's not the kind of charge that would be charged, just for possession.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, that being said, it looks like what's going to happen is that they're trying to get what's called a diversion.
Mm-hmm.
The gun charge is going to be handled as a diversion case, which basically means that because he is a nonviolent offender
Mm-hmm.
and because he has a substance abuse problem, if he can prove that he got his life back together, then the charge will likely be dropped.
Yeah.
Now, the question there is, how often does that actually happen?
Mm-hmm.
All right, is he being given this specifically because they're trying to go easy on him, or is that something that is standard order? Well, it's a little bit complicated. According to a 2016 audit by the Office of the Inspector General, in August of 2015, 78 out of the 94 federal judicial districts didn't even have that program.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Oh, for the diversion. Gotcha.
Yeah, didn't have the diversion program. And in fact, the number of diversion cases active decreased 1%, and there were only 356 of them.
Interesting.
Which accounted for less than 1% of active cases.
Hmm.
And on top of that, this particular charge, when it is brought forward, the typical sentence, the average sentence for offenders of violating the code, which is 18 USC and 922G, is about 55 months in prison
Wow.
or in jail.
It's pretty long. Now,
Yeah.
is that typically like paired with being a violent offender, or are these people that are only charged with?
So that's specifically felony possession.
Interesting.
Now, one of the things to point out is the fact that felony possession in that specific statute is treated pretty much the same with firearms and with drugs.
Interesting.
All right. It's a lot easier to prove that you were in possession of a firearm illegally, but it's a lot harder to prove that you were in possession of drugs illegally.
Gotcha.
So it's kind of treated as it's treated as felony possession. So like that may or may not be also involved with violent crimes, but in this case, we're just talking about the felony possession, and that would typically carry a sentence of 55 months. And it's looking like he's not going to get anything because of this particular circumstance in which he was, part of why he committed the crime was because he was addicted to drugs.
Yeah. And the way these diversion programs work is that, they basically set a set of requirements that the person has to meet, kind of like probation. And so in this case, the expectation, I think, is that Hunter Biden would remain drug-free and not commit any additional crimes for 2 years. And so similar kind of to probation, but it's kind of prior to being charged with the crime in the first place.
Yeah.
And it does require that you admit, that the crime occurred, and admit to facts in the case, and admit to your own addiction as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So all in all, it's looking like what's going to result from this is, of course, the diversion program in which Michael just laid out, and 2 years of probation, which a lot of Republicans are basically calling out as being a light sentence, a slap on the wrist, and trying to make the accusation that this is the Biden administration trying to go easy on Hunter Biden because he is Biden's son. Now, there's a few problems with that. The person who is actually carrying out the prosecution, it's David Weiss, which is a Trump appointee. He's a holdover from the Trump administration. And Garland has basically said, I am staying out of this. This Trump appointed prosecutor, they have full reign. They have free reign. Now, you might argue, like, well, how do we know that he's staying out of it? I mean, I would say if you're a Trump appointed prosecutor and the attorney general isn't interfering with your investigation, I see no reason why you wouldn't be public about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Like,
totally.
why wouldn't you come out and say that? Um, I think that the accusations of some level of nepotism based on the fact that he's Biden's son, I think that that doesn't hold up, and it also misses the point. And in fact, I think that most analyses of this right now are missing the point, because the argument that Republicans are trying to make is that there is a two-tiered justice system for Democrats and for Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
That if a Republican commits something even minor, such as, Donald Trump, that they throw the book at him. Now, of course, the minor charge that they're referring to is stealing nuclear
Fucking
secrets.
espionage. But
But,
who hasn't committed a little light treason?
and that when it comes to Democrats, they're less likely to throw the book at them and just give them a slap on the wrist for other criminal charges. And of course, what Democrats are going to say is either they're just going to ignore this because in the grand scheme of things, this probably doesn't matter that much.
Yeah.
Or they're going to try to say, well, what Hunter Biden did was not nearly as bad as what Trump did.
Mm-hmm.
This is small potatoes. And honestly, the only reason why he's being charged in the first place was because the investigation started under the Trump administration by a Trump appointed prosecutor. So this is actually the fact that it's happening at all. The fact that he's being charged and all is just because he is a Biden. So he's actually being prosecuted because of his political, his political ties. And I think both of those analyses miss the point in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Because the United States does not have a single tier justice system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're right about that.
And it never has.
Yeah.
They're right about that. But it's not about Democrats versus Republicans. It's about elites versus everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in researching this a little bit more, I've come to the conclusion that I think we should add another tier to that, or at least a sub-tier in the elite category. Because what happens most of the time is if a person of a lower socioeconomic status commits a crime, they're charged. They have the book thrown at them.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, they have to spend time in prison before there's even been a trial. They'll sometimes do a plea deal because they couldn't afford bail in the first place. And they will have their entire life ruined because of this, because they can't afford a good lawyer. They can't afford bail. They're fucked over by the system.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Then you have your average everyday elites that are kind of doing things behind the scenes. And they almost never get charged with anything unless what they do is particularly egregious and undeniable. They don't get charged with a goddamn thing. And then in the third tier, I would actually say you have elites that are still in a prestigious position and thus still get preferential treatment, but because they have a public profile, because they have a political profile or ties to a political person or are a political person, that there is more attention given to them.
Mm-hmm.
All right? That there is more of a partisan reason why they are pursued. And I think that that is the category that both Donald Trump and Hunter Biden fall into.
Mm.
So here's what I mean by that. First off, let's look at the whole tax-related crimes thing. All right? When it comes to tax-related crimes, it's actually pretty rare for anybody to be convicted of it. In fact, according to a 2019 article from Tax Attorney Daily, fewer than 2,000 people were convicted of tax crimes, which represents 0.0022% of all taxpayers, despite the fact that the IRS estimates that 15.5% of taxpayers are not completely complying with with tax laws. So already, most people are not being charged with it. But it's also important to point out the fact that the people that tend to be committing tax fraud, that have a tendency to commit tax fraud, the people that tend to be the cheaters are often disproportionately people of a higher socioeconomic status. So people in the top 1% of earners account for 28% of tax evasion. Compare that to the bottom 50% of earners, which account for just 12%. All right.
Interesting.
1% account for 28%, and the bottom half account for just 12%. All right. So the people that tend to commit these crimes tends to be people of a higher socioeconomic status, people like Hunter Biden. But of course, it is something that is rarely pursued. Now, there's a lot of factors that are going to go into whether or not they're going to pursue it. Oftentimes, the more funding that the IRS has, the more likely they are to go after bigger targets such as Hunter Biden, who does have more money, which is kind of funny considering the fact that Kevin McCarthy wanted them to decrease the budget for the IRS, which would make it harder for them to go after people like Hunter Biden, but whatever.
Well, they want to preserve our two-tier justice system, Nathan.
Yeah. So, so people involved with tax fraud are rarely charged to begin with. And the ones that tend to be guilty are disproportionately people that are the higher earners.
Yeah.
But here's another thing that I'd like to point out that is completely missing from his charges, and that is the drug-related charges. Now, he has admitted to smoking crack cocaine. All right? He has admitted to being in possession of drugs, to doing drugs. Like, that is something he has admitted to. Now,
he wrote a fucking book about it.
Yeah. Now, if you've listened to the show, you know that I am no drug warrior. All right. I think that it is fucked up that we lock up people like left and right for drug related crimes. But we do have to point out the fact that the reason why he was never charged with that, why it was never even considered that he would be charged with that, is because he's an elite. All right. It's because he's an elite. 1 in 5 incarcerated people today are locked up for drug-related offenses. 26% of all arrests in America, 26% are drug-related offenses. And before you think, oh well, what about sale versus just possession? 47,380 Americans are arrested annually for the sale and manufacture of heroin, cocaine, and other similar products. And 227,655 Americans are arrested annually for possession. So poor people are always going to be arrested for that crime, for the crime of drugs.
Yeah.
He's not going to be arrested. Hunter Biden's not going to be arrested. Poor people are going to be arrested. And I would also like to point out the fact that one of the biggest drug warriors of the 90s was a man by the name of Joseph Biden, who was the architect behind the 90s crime bill, which exacerbated the war on drugs, led to harsher criminal penalties for drug users, but also continued to create our two-tiered justice system. Because the people that were being charged were not the elites like Hunter Biden. They were your everyday lower socioeconomic status Americans. All right. The conversation to be had from all of these charges is the fact that, yes, Republicans are right when they say that Hunter Biden is being let off easy. They're absolutely right. The reason why Hunter Biden is being let off easy is because he's a rich elite who can afford a damn good lawyer. All right. That's why he's being let off. But the reason why he was even in the spotlight in the first place was because he was a Biden. Now, I think it's also fair to say that the reason why Trump is being charged with the things he's being charged with is because he has such a high profile that they can't really ignore all these crimes.
Well, it's hard to get possession of all those nuclear secrets if you're not of a high profile.
Well, yeah, that too. Like when it comes to some of the charges are directly related to him being president. Some of them aren't. Like some of his real estate shit, like that's not even related to him being president. That's just stuff that he did. And I think it is fair to say that if it weren't for the fact that he had been president, they probably never would have pursued that. But the problem is that they should have been. The problem is you shouldn't have to have a high profile for you to receive not even the same treatment as the rest of America, but like even minor consequences for what you do.
Yeah.
Like even minor slaps on the wrist for what you do. All right? When Trump was supposedly arrested for his campaign finance violation, he wasn't handcuffed.
Yeah.
He didn't have to do like the standard perp walk. In fact, he was even offered to have his arraignment happen over Zoom.
To avoid
That's the
public
type of shit that does not happen if you are an average everyday American. That's the type of shit that you only get if you are an elite like Donald Trump. And this type of deal that Hunter Biden got is the type of deal that you only get if you are an elite. Now, I'm not saying that he should have the book thrown at him anymore because he's an elite. What I'm saying is that we should treat average everyday Americans the same way we treat those elites. All right? First off, if we acknowledge the fact that being addicted to crack cocaine not only is not something that you should go to prison for, but should also be something that is taken into account when deciding whether or not to charge you with a gun-related charge. That is the type of thing that needs to be applied to everybody. All right? That's the type of justice system that we need to have for everybody. We need to be making sure that the people that are charged, the people that are put in prison, are the people that are actually a danger to society. And that is not what's happening. 1 in 5 people in prison are in prison for drug-related offenses. When elites do it, we don't care. When everyday Americans do it, we throw them in prison. All right? So the take from this should be we need to end the war on drugs. And we need to treat everyday Americans the same way, with the same with the same kid gloves that we treat Donald Trump and Hunter Biden. There is a multi-tiered justice system, but it has nothing to do with partisan bias and has everything to do with elites. And Hunter Biden and Donald Trump are both in the good part of it.
Yes,
they're in the
they're
part
both
that you want to be.
Yeah.
They're both benefiting. So Hunter Biden committed crimes. He's being charged with it, and he is being given kid gloves. You know, he is being treated. He is being treated with kid gloves. All right, that is absolutely true. But to try to pretend that the real story here is that he got off easy because he's a Biden is missing so much about our justice system. And of course they're going to miss that. Because the people that are having the conversation, the media, the politicians, they're in that same elite tier of the justice system. So for them, it's the most obvious thing in the world that you would treat them differently, that you would treat them better. All right? This conversation that we're having, what I'm saying would never even occur to them.
Yeah, because they assume they're not a danger to society.
Yeah.